The world wrote him off. Management thought he was too old, too slow, too expendable. But experience doesn't vanish with a signature. And when the unthinkable happened, a crisis no one saw coming, the only person capable of stopping it was the man they'd just let go. John Callahan had spent 30 years guarding Horizon Enterprises, watching over every hallway, every office, every secret no one else noticed. And now, in the span of one blink, they handed him a pink slip, an envelope that stripped him of decades of trust, skill, and vigilance. Outside, the city moved on as if he had never existed. Taxis hummed, neon signs flickered, and rain-slicked streets reflected the lights of a world that no longer had need for him. But John knew something they didn't. Experience like his doesn't retire quietly. Danger doesn't knock politely. And sometimes, the people you dismiss are the only ones who can stop what's coming. Tonight, the man they fired would soon be the only barrier between safety and disaster. And when that moment comes, it will leave everyone asking, how could they ever have let him go? John stepped out onto the sidewalk, the night air sharp against his face, carrying the smell of asphalt and rain. His jacket, worn at the elbows, held the faint scent of polish and machine oil, remnants of decades spent patrolling floors and monitoring cameras. There was no anger in him. Not yet. Just a slow, steady pulse of awareness. He knew the city didn't pause because a man was unemployed. He knew danger didn't wait for retirement papers or HR forms. Behind him, the lobby lights flickered once, then died. A minor electrical fault, the maintenance team would say. But to John, it was a sign. Not supernatural, not prophetic. Just the way things sometimes whispered warnings to those willing to listen. There had been small signs lately, little oddities he couldn't ignore. The CEO's daughter asking too many questions about security protocols. A late-night call he overheard from the surveillance office that didn't make sense. A delivery van parked where it shouldn't have been. Nothing definitive. Nothing that would raise alarms in the HR department. But to someone who had spent decades reading patterns and threats, the city hummed with unease. He tucked his hat tighter against the wind and walked away from the building that had been his life, unaware that his departure was the first thread pulled from a web that had been quietly forming for weeks. The executives would laugh tomorrow at how quickly he left, how inconsequential he seemed. They would never know that the very skill set they had discarded would soon make the difference between tragedy and survival. As John disappeared into the shadows of the city streets, the night held its breath. Somewhere, beyond the glow of streetlights and corporate windows, something was stirring. A series of events that would demand the very instincts he had honed for decades. And when it came, only he could confront it. Only he could act. Only he had the knowledge, the presence of mind, and the courage to face what no one else saw coming. Because when the CEO's daughter's life was about to be threatened, the world would realize the terrible mistake it had made. The man they fired, the one they thought was obsolete, would be the one standing between safety and disaster. And the question remained, would they recognize his value before it was too late? Weeks passed after John Callahan's departure from Horizon Enterprises. The pink slip still sat on the corner of his kitchen table, a cold reminder of how swiftly loyalty can be dismissed. He moved through the city streets like a ghost, a man still wearing the invisible uniform of a protector, but stripped of authority, stripped of purpose. To the outside world, he was just another retiree, another man passed over in favor of younger, cheaper security staff. Even former colleagues, caught up in their own routines, barely noticed his absence. But those who underestimated him did so at their peril. John had learned things the job manuals never taught: how to read human behavior in a hallway, how to anticipate danger in a crowd, how to spot the subtle patterns of a person who was about to make a catastrophic mistake. Experience had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. And though he no longer had a badge or keys, the knowledge remained. He spent his days in quiet observation. Morning coffee at the corner cafe became a study in timing, which delivery trucks arrived first, which patrons hurried past without acknowledgement, which alleys in the city seemed deserted but held shadows. At night, he walked the streets near the office complex, noting every camera, every unlocked door, every potential point of vulnerability. It was an exercise in vigilance born from habit, but also from a lingering sense that his work wasn't finished, that the world never truly rested, and neither could he. Those who had dismissed him assumed he had retired to boredom, perhaps even resentment. But John understood something they didn't. Protection is not a job title. It is a mindset, and that mindset made him invisible in ways that would soon prove invaluable. While the new security team relied on digital monitoring systems and standardized patrols, John relied on observation, intuition, and an unshakable sense of timing. The younger guards saw security as a set of instructions. John saw it as a responsibility to predict and prevent. Yet he knew he had to remain invisible. To step forward too early would have been pointless. To be underestimated was his advantage. He watched the building, saw the subtle changes. Deliveries that arrived without proper logging, contractors who stayed longer than necessary, unfamiliar faces lingering near entrances. Every anomaly was a potential warning sign, every pattern a puzzle waiting to be solved. Even as the city moved past him, oblivious to the quiet diligence of a man they had fired, John remained attuned to threats that others overlooked. And in that underestimation lay the calm before the storm. A storm that would arrive in a matter of days, unannounced, testing the limits of his foresight and courage. Weeks after his dismissal, while others assumed he had faded into irrelevance, John was preparing without knowing it for the night that would define him once more. A night where a single, unnoticed man would become the difference between disaster and survival. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. John noticed small inconsistencies in the rhythm of the office complex he once patrolled. A delivery truck that never followed the approved schedule. An unfamiliar cleaning crew lingering near the executive suites. A receptionist who seemed distracted, her gaze darting to hallways that should have been empty. To most, these details were inconsequential, easily dismissed. But to John, each anomaly was a thread, a potential unraveling of the order he had sworn to protect. He began tracking them meticulously. Notebook in hand, he recorded times, faces, and behaviors. The city outside moved on as it always did, indifferent to the invisible threat growing beneath its polished surface. Every footstep in the lobby, every shadow cast in the late-night corridor, told a story. And John had spent decades learning to read those stories before they became tragedies. Then came the call he had been anticipating but did not expect. A quiet tip from a former colleague. "Something isn't right," the voice said, hesitant. "I don't know who to tell." The words were brief, almost like a fragment of a thought, but they set off a chain reaction in John's mind. The anomalies were no longer coincidences. They were patterns, calculated, deliberate, and escalating. He returned to the building under the cover of darkness, blending with the city's pulse. The cameras, recently updated and sophisticated, now felt predictable to him. He traced each corridor, noting blind spots and exits, the silent whispers of spaces designed to conceal rather than protect. Every detail reinforced the nagging certainty that someone was planning to exploit the vulnerabilities he had once secured effortlessly. The tension in the air was palpable, like the static charge before a storm. John observed the executive elevator, watching the flow of employees and after-hours personnel. Something didn't fit. A young man who appeared too attentive, too rehearsed in his movements. A package left unattended in a corner. A momentary lapse that would be catastrophic if ignored. He recognized it instantly, the precursors of a carefully orchestrated intrusion. John's mind raced, weighing probabilities, calculating risks. The city's lights reflected off glass surfaces, flickering like warning signals. Every hallway echoed with the potential for danger. Every door became a threshold into uncertainty. He realized the threat was no longer abstract. It was imminent, drawing closer with every passing hour. The office he once knew as routine had become a labyrinth of shadows and hidden intentions, and only one person understood its vulnerabilities fully. He returned home briefly, gathering the tools of a profession he was no longer officially part of. Flashlight, key codes memorized, security radios salvaged from his time on the job. Every item was a lifeline to the building he still considered his responsibility, despite what the company's records said. And in the quiet of his apartment, John felt the first true weight of fear in years, not for himself, but for the people he had been hired and then dismissed to protect. The hours passed, each one stretching taut like a wire. John knew the moment of reckoning was coming. Patterns converged, shadows aligned, and the city outside remained oblivious. All that remained was the final sequence, the intrusion that would test his foresight, his courage, and the very instincts that had kept him employed for decades. The night was thick with fog, the city lights smeared into halos by the damp air. John moved like a shadow, unseen and unheard, slipping through the service entrance he had once locked hundreds of times. Every step was deliberate, each footfall measured against the echoes of the polished floors. He had anticipated threats before, but tonight, something was different. Sharper, more calculated, and impossibly close. He reached the surveillance room, a space that had become both a sanctuary and a war room. Screens flickered, displaying grainy images of hallways and stairwells. Most were empty, routine. Then he noticed movement, subtle, almost imperceptible, on camera 3, the east wing that led to the CEO's private suite. A figure lingered near the door, crouched low, checking locks, scanning for cameras. The intruder's movements were precise, professional. Someone who had studied the building as meticulously as John once had. Adrenaline coursed through his veins. He knew the timing would be critical. Every second could tip the balance between a failed intrusion and catastrophe. His hands moved quickly, adjusting the camera angles, looping the feed, giving him precious minutes to anticipate the intruder's next move. The hallway seemed longer than it should, shadows stretching unnaturally, as if the building itself were conspiring to hide the approaching danger. Then he heard it, a soft click, almost drowned out by the hum of the refrigeration units. It was the unmistakable sound of a lock being manipulated. The CEO's daughter. She was still in the building, finishing an evening project, unaware of the predator circling so close. The realization hit John like a physical blow. The threat was not abstract. It was immediate, it was human, and it was lethal. He moved, silent as a whisper, through corridors he knew better than the intruder ever could. Every step was calculated, anticipating blind spots, counting surveillance cameras, memorizing escape routes. He could see the glint of a tool in the intruder's hand, small, precise, designed to force entry without a sound. It was a professional job, one meant to bypass alarms and security. But John had one advantage the intruder could never anticipate: experience. Decades of intuition and pattern recognition surged through him, guiding every movement. As he neared the east wing, a muffled gasp reached him. The intruder had found the daughter first, cornering her near the office. Panic flashed across her face, fleeting but enough for John to identify the precise location. The room's door was partially ajar, shadows dancing against the walls, the flicker of fluorescent lights revealing the outline of two figures. One small, vulnerable, the daughter, the other looming, deliberate, wielding a tool meant to intimidate and coerce. John paused, assessing, calculating. The window of action was narrow. One wrong move and the intruder could escape with leverage, could harm her, could disappear into the night. Yet hesitation was impossible. He had to act now decisively. The hum of the building seemed louder, the fog outside pressing against the windows like a living thing. And in that suspended moment, John became a singular force, guardian, strategist, and savior all in one. He lunged, shadows colliding, the intruder startled but undeterred. A struggle erupted, movements frantic and unrelenting. Every second stretched, the weight of years of vigilance compressed into one critical moment. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos paused, leaving the room heavy with anticipation. The outcome still uncertain, the danger still palpable. The struggle was sudden, violent, and intimate, a collision of experience and raw intent. The intruder had underestimated one critical factor: John's resolve. Every movement the assailant made was met with counteraction. Every attempt to intimidate met with years of trained reflexes and intuition. The room felt smaller with each second, the shadows pressing in as if the walls themselves were witnesses to the confrontation. The CEO's daughter, frozen in the corner, her eyes wide, tried to comprehend the chaos unfolding around her. Her breath came in shallow gasps, each one echoing against the polished walls. The intruder's tool clattered to the floor in a flash of metallic desperation, a small but crucial advantage John seized instantly. With one motion, he shifted, using leverage and body weight to subdue the intruder against the wall. The struggle was not cinematic in a Hollywood sense. There were no choreographed punches or slow-motion leaps, but it was real, raw, and terrifying. John's mind worked faster than his body, calculating exit routes, anticipating panic, and predicting the intruder's next moves. One mistake could mean disaster, but years of guarding, observing, and anticipating had honed his instincts to perfection. The intruder lashed out, trying to regain control, but each attempt only revealed inexperience in the face of John's seasoned presence. Every shift of weight, every step, every snap of a wrist brought John closer to victory, or so it seemed. The daughter's hand trembled as she reached for the phone on the desk. Her fingers brushed the receiver, but she froze when the intruder turned toward her. The sound of her attempted call, muffled by tension, propelled John into his final move. Using a precise, almost surgical strike, he forced the intruder to the ground, immobilizing him just long enough to gain control of the situation. The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the labored breathing of those inside. John quickly assessed the intruder, young, desperate, perhaps coerced by some unseen network, or maybe driven by greed. The weight of the discovery pressed on him. This was more than a simple break-in. There were motives buried beneath the surface, layers of intention that might never be fully understood. But in this moment, theory had no place. Action was all that mattered. He secured the intruder with zip ties found in the supply closet, a relic from the building's past security measures, and ensured the CEO's daughter was safe, keeping her close, calm, and protected. Her relief was palpable, but John remained focused, scanning the room for overlooked details. Weapons, escape routes, hidden threats. He had learned long ago that danger rarely came in the form of a single act. It was layered, patient, and often invisible. Outside, the city continued, unaware of the drama unfolding inside one of its most modern office buildings. The fog pressed against the windows, blurring the streetlights and muffling the distant hum of traffic. Inside, time moved differently. Seconds stretched into eternities, and the consequences of each decision pressed heavily on those present. The intruder's motives, his history, and the reason for targeting the CEO's daughter would eventually unravel, but that unraveling was secondary to survival. John finally allowed himself a moment to breathe, to absorb the enormity of what had just transpired. Weeks of underestimation, dismissal, and unemployment had culminated in a single moment of decisive action. A redemption forged in tension and danger. The daughter's eyes met his, gratitude and awe reflected in her gaze. Words were unnecessary. The silence spoke volumes. As sirens approached in the distance, summoned by the daughter's earlier attempt to call for help, John's mind turned to the aftermath. The intruder would be dealt with by authorities, but the lessons of vigilance, preparation, and the quiet power of experience would linger. He had been written off, dismissed, deemed irrelevant, yet he had acted when it mattered most. In that action, he reclaimed not just his professional dignity but his personal purpose. The city would never know the full story, would never understand the quiet heroism unfolding behind locked doors. And that was precisely how John wanted it. His role had never been about recognition. It had been about protection, about timing, and about the rare, critical moments where preparation met fate. Tonight, those moments had aligned perfectly, and a life, a future, had been saved. But even as the daughter was escorted to safety, questions remained. Who had sent the intruder? Why her, specifically? And had this been the first attempt, or merely the opening act of a plan far more sinister? Those answers would come in time, but for now, the immediate danger was over. The rescue had succeeded, the confrontation had climaxed, and one truth was undeniable. Experience, courage, and vigilance had prevailed where assumptions had failed. The chaos of the night gradually gave way to a tense calm. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as they neared the building, slicing through the foggy streets and signaling the arrival of law enforcement. John stepped back, allowing the police to take over the scene, his hands still shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that had coursed through him for what felt like an eternity. The daughter, now wrapped in a blanket provided by the first responders, clung to her mother on the phone, recounting in fragmented sentences the terror she had just endured. Every word underscored a truth John had known for years. Danger doesn't announce itself politely, and it rarely plays fair. In the aftermath, questions were inevitable. How had the intruder gained access? What had driven him to target the CEO's daughter? Was this an isolated incident, or a sign of something far more orchestrated? The police moved with professional efficiency, cordoning off the area, taking statements, and collecting evidence. But John knew, and the daughter's eyes confirmed, that bureaucracy could never fully capture the essence of what had happened in those tense minutes. It was a human story first, a story of instinct, courage, and the quiet power of someone who refused to be underestimated. Word of the event spread quickly through the company. Rumors swirled about the former security guard who had been dismissed, only to reappear at the moment of greatest need. Some were skeptical, assuming embellishment. Others, who had known John during his tenure, were not surprised at all. He had always been meticulous, observant, and quietly formidable. That combination, once undervalued and dismissed, had made the difference between life and death. The CEO herself arrived at the scene hours later, her expression a mixture of relief, astonishment, and gratitude. She approached John, a woman used to power, control, and authority, now confronting a truth she had long ignored. Experience and integrity cannot be replaced by youthful optimism or corporate hierarchy. Words were exchanged, simple, sincere, and heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. The daughter, her face pale but resolute, finally spoke. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had stared fear in the eyes and survived. It was the kind of gratitude that transforms, leaving an indelible impression not just on the receiver but on everyone present. The media, of course, latched onto the story. Headlines portrayed a narrative of miraculous timing, of a dismissed guard who became an unlikely hero. Yet the truth was more nuanced, less sensational. John had acted not for recognition, not for fame, but because preparation and duty had become second nature. Every decision he made had been calculated, informed by decades of observation, training, and an innate understanding of human behavior. The public might see the heroism, but few would understand the precision, patience, and persistence behind it. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. John, once written off by the corporate world, found that respect, long overdue, began to follow him wherever he went. Offers for consulting, private security, and mentorship arrived, though he accepted few. Fame was never the goal. The restoration of purpose and acknowledgement of skill was reward enough. The CEO implemented new security protocols, but more importantly, she initiated a cultural shift. A recognition that experience and vigilance must never be underestimated, even in a world obsessed with youth and technology. For John, the event became both a culmination and a beginning. The night of the confrontation had crystallized years of lessons. The importance of presence, patience, and the unglamorous work of observation. But it also reminded him of the fragility of life, the randomness of danger, and the unspoken heroism that often goes unnoticed. And as he walked through the city streets, blending into the crowd, he carried with him a quiet satisfaction. That in a single, critical moment, he had saved a life, redeemed himself in the eyes of those who doubted him, and reminded the world, even if only briefly, that experience and courage remain invaluable. Yet, even in resolution, questions lingered. The intruder's motives, the forces behind him, and the potential threats still hidden in shadows were far from fully uncovered. For John, vigilance would remain a lifelong companion. The night of danger had ended, but the lessons endured, whispering a truth too often ignored. Heroes are not always celebrated. Sometimes, they are the ones who act in silence, unseen, ensuring that others can survive the world's unpredictability.
This was Trace Crime Files. Subscribe for more stories where truth is stranger than fiction, and justice is never as simple as it seems.